a good day so far. All right, so today we'll be doing our grade 1 English lesson on irregular past tense. So we'll be doing our grade 1 lesson on our grade 1 English lesson on irregular past tense. And before we start, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. You're going to log in with your username as well as your password. Once you've logged in with your username as well as your password, you're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 1. All right, then you're going to scroll down all the way until you get to the chapter of irregular past tense. So we're by irregular past tense. All right, so the chapter is irregular past tense. Our subject is language arts, or it's English, grade 1. And then the lesson that we are going to be focusing on today is to identify the irregular past tense. So we're going to identify the irregular past tense. Okay, so when it comes to irregular past tense, right? So some verbs they tell us about something that has happened already. And in our previous lesson, we spoke about the different verb tenses. We spoke about the different verb tenses and we spoke about present tense, past tense, as well as future tense. And we said in the present tense, it basically shows things that is happening now in the current moment, present moment. The future tense, it basically shows things that will be happening, meaning it did not happen as yet, but it will happen. And then we have the past tense, right? In the past tense, it basically tells us about something that happened already, right? And we are now, a continuation of our lesson is irregular past tense, right? And usually when it comes to your normal past tense, like let's say regular past tense, and then we just add ed to a word to basically to show that it's in the past, right? It happened already. But when it comes to irregular past tense, then the verb changes. So it's like the whole word changes, or a few words changes. Like for example, the spelling, right? So basically the verb changed the spelling to tell us about the past. So there's no rule that you need to follow. You are just going to have to remember what the spelling it is that you need to use. So when we made mention of just some of the verbs, right, that tell us about things that has happened already, we say that it usually ends in ed, right? And examples of those verbs, right, that usually just ends in ed, which is usually your regular verbs. It's the example where we say, we walked to the park yesterday. So walked, right? There we have walked. So your normal verb that is not in the past would be walk, right? But in the past, we walked to the park yesterday, which means that we added an ed to show that this verb is in the past. So now the word changed to walked. So I walk, which is the present, to the park. But in the past, I walked, right? So we just added an ed. Another example is we looked at the flowers there. Looked, right? So the normal present verb is to look, right? It's something that we're doing now. But in the past, right, we looked at the flowers there yesterday. We looked at the flowers there. So we add an ed. So that is with irregular verbs, right? So we said some verbs, they tell us about something that has happened already. And these verbs, they just tell us about the past. So they end in ed, right? So they end in ed. So the verb ends in ed. However, when it comes to irregular past tense, so when it comes to irregular past tense, right? So some verbs are irregular in the past tense. And with the verbs that is irregular in the past tense, these verbs, they change the spelling. So now the spelling changes. We don't just add ed to show that it is in the past, right? The spelling of the verb changes. So these verbs, they change the spelling to tell us about the past. So like I said, there is basically no rule that you need to follow where we say we add ed or something to show that it is just in the past, because the word or the verb change its spelling, right, to tell us about the past. So you're just going to have to remember what spelling to use. If you write a word or a verb to show that it is irregular in the past tense, and then it just means that you're going to have to remember what spelling to use, because the verb change its spelling to tell us about the past. And an example is, we saw some ducks at the park. So if we identify the verb, right, then we can say the verb is saw. But now the present tense, or the present tense of saw is to see. So as you can see how the word has changed. We did not just add an ed or anything. It's the spelling of the word changes, because see changed to saw. I see. This is in the present. I see. It's something that you're doing now. It's like you can see in front of you. I can see the words on the screen. But in the past, yesterday, last week, I saw the words on the screen, and now this is in the past. So as you can see, the wording changes from see, and the spelling changes to saw. So the past tense of see is saw. We ate lunch on the grass. So ate is our verb. Ate. So ate is our past tense verb. And the present tense of ate is eat. This shows that you are doing something now. We eat lunch on the grass. That is now. That's in the present. But in the past, we ate lunch on the grass, meaning that this happened already. Ate happened already. It's in the past. And eat is something that you're doing now. So as you can see, the wording changed from eat to ate. So the verb changed its spelling to tell us about the past. You are just going to have to remember what spelling to use. All right, so we are doing the lesson on aplusstudents.ca. So if you do want to go back and recap on the lesson, you can go to aplusstudents.ca. Once you go to aplusstudents.ca, and then here we have once again our chapter, which is irregular past tense, the subject, which is English or language arts that we are doing today, grade 1, and the lesson that we are focusing on is to identify the irregular past tense. And that you will find on aplusstudents.ca. All right, so when it comes to regular and irregular verbs, right? Remember we said with irregular verbs, it's the it's as if the spelling changes, the verb spelling changes, and then we're forming another word, right? There's no rule like add an ed, add no, right? It's the word changes, the verb changes, or the spelling of the verb changes. So the difference between regular and irregular verbs, right? So when it comes to regular verbs, let's start with regular verbs. The past tense form end in ed. So with regular verbs, there's basically a rule that they need to follow where you just add an ed and then it will basically show that this word is in the past. And an example is play and played. So played. Dance. Dance. And the irregular past tense of dance is danced. The regular past tense. And look, right? To look. And the past tense of look is looked. So this is basically the regular past tense. And with regular past tense, we just add ed at the end of that form of the past tense. But now with irregular past tense, remember we said that it's as if the spelling changed of the word. So irregular past tense, the past forms have lots of different endings. Remember, you are just going to have to know which one it is. And with the irregular past tense, for example, we have run. Run being our verb in the present tense, run. And if we make mention of run in the past tense, so the past tense of run is ran. So run is our past tense. and ran is the irregular past tense. So, no, run is the present tense. It's the present tense. And ran is the irregular past tense of run. So the present tense is read, and read stays the same, right? So read can be in the present and read can be in the past. So see being our present tense. And in the past, right, we can say saw. Or we can say seen. And as you can see, the spelling of that words it changed from C-S-E-E to saw S-A-W. And remember once again with irregular verbs or irregular past tense verbs, you are going to have to know, you're just going to have to know the the past tense, the form, right? You're just going to have to know the form because there's basically no rule that says you must either add ed or you must add something. You're just going to have to know what the past tense form is, and especially when the word changes. All right, so we said that the irregular past tense, right? It's the spelling changes. So we don't just have a rule that we follow where we say we add an ed or anything. The spelling changes of that word. And here is but a few examples of the spelling. And we see that irregular past tense verbs, some past tense verbs and are irregular, and then the spelling changes instead of just adding ed. And here is but a few examples. All right. So in the present, we have do, something that you're doing now. I do um something that you're doing. So do. But then in the past, right? So now the wording changes. And in the past, we say does. So do the chores, right? That is do. Do the chores. But in the past tense, he can either say did the chores or does the chores. Sit, right? This is more common. I sit, something that you're doing now. I sit on the chair. But in the past, or yesterday, or earlier, I sat on the chair or I sat in front of my laptop. fly. The birds fly in the sky. That's fly. And that shows the present tense. It's something that the birds are doing now. They fly in the sky, right? But in the past, they flew, which is Flew. They flew. Win. I win a medal for athletics. But last week, I won a medal. So won is the past tense form of win. And then we have run, which is our past tense, present tense. But in the past, we ran. So there's basically quite a few irregular past tense verbs, right? There's a lot. And like we say, there's no, we can't say just add an ed, right? Because the verb is basically irregular, right? So when it comes to irregular past tense verbs, some past tense verbs, it's irregular and the spelling changes. So the spelling changes instead of just adding an ed, right? All right. So before we go on to doing certain activities, you're going to go to aplusstudents.ca. We're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Grade 1, Language Arts. And we are by the chapter of irregular past tense. And the lesson that we are focusing on today is to identify the irregular past tense. So we're going to click on the. And we said some verbs, they tell us about something that has happened already, right? And they usually end in ed. But when it comes to irregular past tense, because now some verbs are irregular in the past tense, right? And we see that with the verbs that is irregular in the past tense, these verbs, they change their spelling. So the spelling of these words, it changes. And it tells us about the past. And remember, we said that when the spelling changes, you are just going to have to remember what spelling to use. For example, we saw some ducks at the park. Saw. And we say that the present tense for saw is see. So that is the present tense, which means that the word changes, the spelling changes to saw. And saw is in the past. Sees now, which is the present. And then we have another one, which is we ate lunch on the grass. Ate. So ate. And the present tense of ate is eat, something that you're doing now. I eat lunch on the grass. But the past tense form, something that you did in the past, you did it already. You ate. And as you can see, the wording changes or the spelling changed. Not much, but it still changed. So you're just going to have to remember what spelling to use. So ate is in the present. Eat is in the present and ate is in the past. All right, so now we're going on to activities, right? All right, so if we look at the sentence, we're going to have to say which sentence tells us about the past. Is it mom gave me a hug? Or mom give me a hug? Okay, it's not question mark. It's only a full stop. So we need to choose one of these two sentences. We need to say which sentence is or tells us about the past. Is it mom gave me a hug or mom give me a hug, gives me a hug? So we need to say which word is in the past or tells us about the past. Is it mom gave me a hug or mom gives me a hug? So if we look at the verb in each of the sentences, right? And find the verb that tells us about the past, and then we can say it is mom gave me a hug. Gave. And gave, it tells us about something that happened already. It's in the past, right? And gives is showing in the present. All right. So you're going to have to look at these sentences and you're going to say which one is the past. Does his homework. Or so Tim does his homework, or we can say Tim did his homework. We need to say which of these two sentences are in the past. Tim does his homework. Tim did his homework. So if we identify the verb that tells us about the past, then we will say it is does. So Tim does his homework. So Tim does his homework is basically in the present, sorry. Something that he's doing now, right? He does his homework. It is something that he's doing now. But if he did something already, right? And then we can say did. Tim did his homework. And did is, it's basically in the past. That shows the past. So does and did. All right. So now we're going to our test. And in the test, we are going to say which sentence tells us about the past. So we are going to have to look at the word in bold to see which word tells us about the past. Tess took some food to Mrs. Chan. So Tess took some food to Mrs. Chan, or Tess takes some food to Mrs. Chan. We need to say which of these two sentences tells us about the past. Is it took or takes? Is it Tess took some food to Mrs. Chan, or Tess takes some food to Mrs. Chan? We need to choose the sentence that tells us about the past. All right, so if we select the sentence that tells us about the past, then we can say took. Mrs. Chan took some food to Mrs. Chan. We study taste took because if it's takes, then it means that it is now. But took is in the past. She took food to Mrs. Chan. So took. And if you also say took, then well done. It is correct. We hid dad's shoes. We hid dad's shoes. Or we hide dad's shoes. We need to choose the correct one that tells us about the past. We hid it or we hide dad's shoes. We need to tell which one tells us about the past. We hid dad's shoes or we hide dad's shoes. And if we choose the correct one, then it means that we hid dad's shoes. Because hiding is something that we're doing now. So we hid dad's shoes. And hid is in the past. It tells us about the past. So we need to say, oops, what sentence tells us about the past. The children go into the barn. They go, or the children went into the barn. So the children go into the barn, or the children went into the barn. Sentences that tells us about the past. Go or went in the past. Something that happened already. And if we select the sentence that tells us about the past, then we can say the children they went into the barn. All right. So which sentence now tells us about the past? Tim does his homework or Tim did his homework? Tim does his homework or Tim did his homework? We need to find the sentence that tells us about the past. So Tim does his homework or Tim did his homework in the past. So if we select the sentence that tells us about the past, and then we can say Tim did his homework, right? He did his homework early on. We did his homework before supper time. We did his homework after school. So did is in the past. And then Nina saw a boat on the lake. Nina saw a boat on the lake. Or Nina sees a boat on the lake. So it's either Nina saw a boat on the lake or Nina sees a boat on the lake. We need to choose the correct sentence that tells us about the past. Is it saw or sees? And the sentence that tells us about the past, we can say is Nina saw a lifeboat on the lake. Saw. Sees is something that he sees now, right? So saw shows the past tense. All right. And which sentence tells us about the past? Is it either we sit under the tree or we sat under the tree? The sentence that tells us about the past. We sit under the tree or we sat under the tree. So sit or sat. Something that you did already. All right, so something that happened in the past, we can say we sat under the tree. Sat. Because sit is in the present tense. All right. All right. So basically, so far that is our irregular past tense verbs, and we said that the word or the spelling it changes, right? So from the present to the past tense, the spelling changes. So you are just gonna have to know the rule. You're gonna have to know which word or spelling you're gonna have to write down or identify in order to show the irregular past tense of that verb. Because there's no rules that we need to follow, we just add an ed. There's no rules. All right, so now we're gonna have to match. We're going to have to match the verbs, which is here in the present, with the verbs in the past. So we're going to match the verb in the present with the match in the past. And as we can see, rise is already done for us. So present is where you rise, and in the past, I rose. All right, so now I think something that you're doing now. I'm thinking, I think, but in the past, I actually thought about. So thought is our irregular past tense. And then do. Do is in the present. It's something that we are doing now. Do. And in the past, the past of do is did. So I do something now, but I did it early on. Make. I make a remodel or structure for let's say for maths. But in the past, I made the structure. I make now, but in the past, I made. And then we have sleep. Sleep is something that we're doing now. But in the past, I slept like a baby. And then we have go. I go to the park. But in the past, I went to the park. Hang. Mom asked me to hang the laundry. But in the past, I hung the laundry. Hung. So the spelling changes. Hang, hung. I run to school. Yesterday, I ran to school. Today, I write my name on a piece of paper. I write my name. And wrote is the past tense. So write and wrote. So see, something that I'm doing now. So see, in the past, it's saw. So this is but a few words that shows both irregular as well as regular, let's say present tense. So it shows the present tense as well as we had to identify the past tense, or the past, or the irregular past tense. That is what we had to identify. And remember, we said with irregular past tense, you're just going to have to remember the verb because the verb changes its spelling, right? All right, so we did to identify irregular past tense. Thank you very much for joining the class, grade ones, and you should have a good day so far. Goodbye.